Part 1 of this series of videos discuss the bravery of Governor Ron DeSantis of the state of Florida in the United States in pushing back against the juggernaut of woke and LGBTQ propaganda. Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary since 2010, who is standing up to the German onslaught with the LGBTQ agenda, and President Putin of Russia, who is not surrendering Ukrainian kids or mixed marriages between Russians and German masquerader Ukrainians and letting them become children of the devil, which is what the Germans want to turn them into. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. This part 1 video discusses why the Germans and German masqueraders work so hard to lead our people in America and British Commonwealth nations to sexual sins. God says it very plainly in Isaiah 58 verse 1 what the job of God's true church is in this end of the end times. Cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions or sins, and the house of Jacob their sins. House of Jacob or Israel are primarily the American and British peoples. Therefore, I am going to do some plain speaking in this video. Germans are the modern descendants of the ancient Assyrians. After the flood, their patriarch Asher, the grandson of Noah, after whom the Assyrians are named, had heard of pre-flood stories about how Lamech, the Zeus of the myths, and his family ruled the entire world. After the flood, he too had a desire to build a world-ruling empire. The ancient historian of the 3rd century BCE, Brassus, as quoted in Eusebius Salverti's book, History of the Names, Men and Nations and Places, which was written in French in 1862. He states, at this period, that is 2055 to 2038 BCE, Jupiter Belus, which is Asher's mythologized name, Belus means Lord, began to be affected by a desire for conquest. He further says on page 327, Ninus, who was actually Asher's son and general of his forces, collected all his forces and taking advantage of the military preparations of his father Jupiter Belus, he declared war against all the nations. He spared none. Thus the German desire to conquer and rule the world is as old as the original patriarch Asher, who lived more than 4,000 years ago. Germans no longer hide the fact that they are Satan worshippers and get their guidance from him directly on how to conquer the world. In many of my videos, I've explained that they follow Bible prophecies very closely so that they're fully informed about their American, British, and Jewish enemies. They have their own prophets who have been well schooled in prophecy, having learned it from Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong, through whom God founded the modern era of his church. God made a covenant with ancient Israel during the time of Moses after they came out of Egypt to be his people and he to be their God. The covenant or agreement had terms and conditions. It prescribed incredible physical blessings of material prosperity for obedience to God's laws and curses for disobedience. These blessings and curses are stated in two chapters of the Bible, Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. His laws are stated in the 5 books of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. This is what Leviticus 26, 3 to 12, 14 to 16, 27 to 33, and 36 state. First, God stated the blessings for obedience to his laws. If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and perform them, then I will give you rain in its season, the land shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last till the time of vintage, and the vintage shall last till the time of sowing. You shall eat your bread to the full and dwell in your land safely. I will give peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none will make you afraid. I will rid the land of evil beasts, and the sword will not go through your land. You will chase your enemies, and they shall fall by the sword before you. 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. Your enemies shall fall by the sword before you. For I will look on you favorably and make you fruitful, multiply you and confirm my covenant with you. You shall eat the old harvest and clear out the old because of the new. I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. But if you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, and if you despise my statutes, or if your soul abhors my judgments, so that you do not perform all my commandments, but break my covenant, I will also do this to you. I will even appoint terror over you, wasting disease and fever, which shall consume the eyes and cause sorrow of heart. And you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you, and you shall be defeated by your enemies. Those who hate you shall reign over you, and you shall flee when no one pursues you. After all this, if you do not obey me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. When ancient Israel did not obey God, he stated in verse 18 that he would punish them 7 times for their sins. A time is a year of 368 days in prophecy. 7 times would be 7 years, meaning 2,520 days. That is 360 multiplied by 7. In prophecy, there is a principle of a year for a day in punishing people. For example, God sent out spies to spy on the land Israel was to occupy for 40 days. But 10 of the 12 spies brought a false, evil report of the land, and Israel refused to go in and possess the land and complained. The punishment is stated in Numbers 14, verse 34. According to the number of days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years, and you shall know my rejection. After Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son Isaac, God had conferred his blessings on him unconditionally in Genesis 22, verses 15 to 18. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. However, when ancient Israel continued to disobey God, he could not confer his promised blessings on them. He allowed them to be taken captive by the ancient Assyrians between 721 BCE to 718 BCE and be punished for 2,520 years without receiving the blessings. Since there is no year 0 between 1 BCE and AD 1, 2,520 years from 721 BCE is actually just the year 1800. The year 718 BCE is 3 years after 721 BCE. So 2,520 years from 721 to 718 BCE are 1800 to 1803 AD. Beginning in 1800 to 1803, the modern descendants of Manasseh and Ephraim, which are American and British Commonwealth nations, suddenly became the recipients of the bountiful blessings of Abraham, land, wealth, God's inspiration, and technological innovations and resources. America and British Commonwealth nations have enjoyed God's blessing unconditionally promised to Abraham for 220 years now. God is no longer obligated to continue those blessings if we continue to disobey his laws. Leviticus 26 further continues with the curses if we continue to disobey God's laws, beginning with verse 27. And after all this, if you do not obey me but walk contrary to me, then I also will walk contrary to you in fury, and I will chastise you 7 times for your sins. You shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. I will destroy your high places and cut down your incense altars, and cast your carcasses on the lifeless forms of your idols, and my soul shall not abhor you. I will lay your cities waste and bring your sanctuaries, that is, churches, to desolation, and I will not smell the fragrance of your sweet aromas. I will bring the land to desolation, and your enemies who dwell in it shall be astonished at it. I will scatter you among the nations, meaning national slavery, and draw out a sword after you. Your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. And as for those of you who are left, I will send faintness into their hearts in the land of their enemies. The sound of a shaken leaf shall cause them to flee. They shall flee as though fleeing from a sword, and they shall fall when no one pursues. They shall stumble over one another, as it were before a sword, when no one pursues. And you shall have no power to stand before your enemies. You shall perish among the nations, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And those of you who are left, that is, survivors, shall waste away in their iniquity in their enemies' lands. Also in their fathers' iniquities which is before them, they shall waste away. And if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers, and the unfaithfulness in which they were unfaithful to me, and that they also have walked contrary to me, and that I have also walked contrary to them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if their uncircumcised hearts are humbled and they accept their guilt, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham I will remember. I will remember the land. Yet for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, nor shall I abhor them to utterly destroy them and break my covenant with them. For I am the Lord their God. But for their sake I will remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt to the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. In these curses, God did not say that He would let us off without punishment if we are deceived into committing sin. He has written the law, and we are supposed to read and study it and avoid violating it under all circumstances. Being deceived into sin is no excuse, as Adam and Eve found out. Perhaps you can now understand why the Germans would pull out all the stops, use any propaganda they can to cause our nations to violate God's laws. They know that it will lead to defeat and war and national slavery for our nations. They also know many other prophecies that show that a national slavery will come at the hands of the Germans, as stated in Isaiah 10 verses 5 to 6. O Assyrian, the rod of my anger and the staff in their hand is my indignation. I will judge them. I will send them against a hypocritical nation. Against the people of my wrath will I give them a charge, to take the spoil and to take the prey, and to tread them like the mire of the streets. The Germans know that from all these prophecies, that the best way for our nations to lose God's protection is to cause us to sin. After we lose God's protection, it'll be easy for them to conquer us. So Germans, through German masqueraders, who are people of German ancestry living in our countries, lead us to sin by promoting every form of lawlessness, which in 1 John 3 verse 4 is defined as sin. Whosoever commits transgresses also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. And whoever commits sin also commits lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. As stated earlier, Germans no longer hide the fact that they are Satan worshippers and get their guidance from him directly on how to conquer the world. That's why it should be easy for us to understand why Germans promote lawlessness, because verse 8 explains, "He who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning." Satan guides them on how to lead America and British Commonwealth nations to sin. So how do a nation sin? By violating God's 10 commandments, worshipping pagan gods and pagan festivals such as Christmas, Easter, Halloween, Valentine's Day, and New Year's, worshipping on Sunday, the day of sun worship, rather than the commanded Sabbath day, disobeying God by not keeping the annual holy days He has commanded, to be kept as mentioned in Leviticus 23, which picture his plan of salvation for mankind, eating unclean food such as pork, shellfish, rabbits, and unclean birds. We lead the world in sexual perversions and parade them around the world, and even try to coerce other nations to follow their people to participate in them. However, God, through Isaiah the prophet, gets to the source of the problem in Isaiah 3 verses 9 to 12. The show of their countenance or face witnesses against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom. They hide it not. Woe unto their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. God here identifies sexual sins as one of our nation's greatest evils. He then prophesies what the result of these sins will be in verses 25 to 26. Your men shall fall by the sword, and your right mighty in the war, and her gate shall lament and mourn, and she, meaning Jerusalem, being desolate, shall sit upon the ground. The German masqueraders pervert our culture in many ways. Third of the Ten Commandments says in Exodus 20 verse 7, You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. They invent all kinds of euphemism to swear by God's name, such as gosh, OMG, Yod, Gad, and bejesus, etc., used infrequently in conversation, thus demonstrating irreverence towards God. These attitudes and phrases are passed on to children who hear them in normal conversation and then grow up being irreverent towards God. I've seen German masqueraders in the middle of a normal conversation suddenly break out into some of the foulest language you can imagine. They have perverted the media and films to promote breaking God's laws, particularly about aspects of parents and sanctity of marriage. They have married and deliberately divorced to give the impression it was a normal way of life. They have made all-out efforts to promote homosexuality and use every avenue for agenda to have it used every avenue of propaganda to have it accepted as a normal way of life. In the past decade or so, they have gone away beyond simple homosexuality, as evidenced by all that LGBTQ encompasses. God's law says in Leviticus 18 verse 23 and 24, You shall not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination. Defile not yourselves in any of these things, for in these things the nations are defiled which are cast out before you. The penalty for sin is stated in Leviticus 20 verse 13. If a man also lies with background as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. Besides God sometimes directly carrying out the penalty for such sins, such as in Sodom and Gomorrah, to set an example, violations of God's laws also automatically bring penalties. Research the physical and mental pain and suffering associated with such vile acts to be better informed. It also leads to perversion of society. That's why the Germans try to impose their LGBTQ agenda on other nations as well. Only Viktor Orban of Hungary is brave enough to oppose them despite what they can do to hurt Hungary economically and in many ways because of its membership in the EU. In my video of 5/20/22 about the Colorado Springs LGBTQ bar shooting titled More Celebrities Executed and a LGBTQ Club Shooting, I exposed the fact that German masqueraders were engaged in promoting their wild lifestyle. I stated the following. In Colorado Springs, 22-year-old Anderson Lee Aldrich entered a LGBTQ nightclub called Club Q just before midnight on Saturday, November 19, 2022, and immediately opened fire, killing 5 people and injuring 17 others. 2 patrons with military background confronted and fought the German gunmen, preventing further bloodshed. My purpose is not to go into Aldrich's background or rail against the LGBTQ lifestyle. My position is very clear. I consider this lifestyle immoral and condemned by God, but I don't advocate that such people should be summarily shot dead. But this particular killing was not a random act. It was carried out to send a message to the particular types of owners, such as clubs, who are deliberately promoting this lifestyle. They are German masqueraders or their allies. They promote such lifestyle in America, British Commonwealth nations, knowing fully well that God hates such sin, which will bring his wealth on our nations, as prophesied in Isaiah 3 verses 9 to 12, which states, "The look on their countenance or faces, meaning witnesses against them. They do not hide it. Woe to their soul, for they have rewarded evil unto themselves. Woe to the wicked, it shall be ill with him. For the reward of his hand shall be given him. O my people, those who lead you, meaning our national anthem and the state local legislators and men of religion, cause you to err and destroy the way of your paths." German masqueraders who own these bars in some cases use threats to force people to become gay, who then draw in other people by forcing them into the lifestyle. That's why the shooting at Club Q occurred, to send a message to owners. They are drawing in people into this sinful lifestyle with threats of violence. Isaiah the prophet, however, lays the blame squarely on our leaders and our courts to give their stamp of approval to the sinful lifestyle by passing laws that legitimize it and prosecute people and even fire them from their jobs if they criticize criticize it in certain situations. Because of such laws, no one can speak openly against it. Instead, all legislators, political and religious leaders should be railing against the lifestyle to discourage it. But this particular action was necessary to send such club owners a message that their use of threats to promote the lifestyle is known, and there are other forceful and violent ways to dealing with them. Another major incident, only much bigger, was the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida on June 12, 2016, in which 50 people died, including the gunman. Pulse nightclub was one of Orlando's best-known clubs, promoted by German masqueraders to pervert its Americans. Today, it requires extraordinary courage to oppose the global German propaganda juggernaut. German masqueraders in all white countries previously began to howl down any politician or leader or groups that utters even a squeak against the immoral, ugly LGBTQ crowd, or tries to enact legislation to oppose them in spreading their filth and vile behavior to rest of their communities and the countries they live in, and bring in all their might and all the media at their disposal to try and defeat such politicians or elections, or punish corporations, sports organizations, athletes, entertainment celebrities, cities, and other states that oppose their agenda by boycotting them. They then clout because German masqueraders and their allies number close to half the US and UK population. That's why I call Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, and President Putin of Russia as extraordinary individuals and brave politicians and readers. In part 2 video, I will discuss the acts of these three cases, political leaders in confronting German wickedness head-on. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos on world news events, World War III Watch, politics, international business, how Bible prophecy is playing an important role in world affairs, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels, Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, to view and get information on the latest videos.